Hello, chess friends. Good to see you again. I want to present to you today a game very interesting and very instructive in the Nimzo-Indian Defence for Black. And it's not just any game. It is a game that happened a few days before in the Sinquefield Cup. And after this round, after the third round in the Sinquefield Cup, Magnus Carlsen with white withdrew from the tournament. Now, black is Hans Niemann, white is Magnus Carlsen. So let's just go through the game and just pinpoint a couple of key moments in the game's evolution. Okay, just don't forget, guys, if you find this useful and enjoyable to some extent, subscribe to my YouTube channel. And now let's proceed to the game. So, Magnus white, Hans Niemann with blacks. Okay, does the arrow go? Yeah, there you go. So, d4, knight f6, c4, e6. Now the bishop is ready to go. I'll just try to, just say some basic ideas and we go into more complex stuff very soon. So bishop b4, knight is being pinned now. g3 has been played, consider the sideline. Mainly, my chess friends, white replies with moves like queen c2, is even playable a3, f3, e3, f3, knight f3. But Magnus chose to play not a very popular line here, thinking that maybe he will outplay his opponent, although apparently the engines and the commentators appreciate that this continuation that he chose to play gives black a slight advantage. So g3. Okay, castled, bishop g2, d5 already challenging the pawn on c4. a3 attacking the bishop. You could see now, bishop attacks the pawn attacks the bishop. Bishop takes and pawn takes on c3. And throughout the game, this pawn will be a weakness and the a3 pawn is a little bit of a liability too. So we'll get there. Pawn takes, knight f3, white is ready to castle, c5 already undermining in the center. And if you watch, guys, the setup, black has castled their king. Now they only need to look for ways to activate their pieces. So the bishop on c8 is a little bit idle, but it will get freed up very soon. So castle for white takes, queen captures, knight develops with tempo from the back row, attacking the queen, needs to go away. Queen grabs the pawn on c4, and now the move e5, which frees up the bishop, as you could see, perhaps e6, you never know. Queen is being attacked, and it's very happy bishop now. The bishop on c8 is a happy bishop. Bishop to g5. We've got a pin. The knight on f6 can't move. h6 to just try and unpin. And if you watch it, guys, you can't withdraw the bishop, right? So, I mean, you can't go to h4 because of the g5. And if you go back with the bishop, you won't be very happy. That's a very bad move because the e4 might be pushed at some point. So you just either trade or play what Magnus played. Apparently, that was not the best choice. The engine evaluates that Magnus should have taken on f6. He didn't take, though. He played rook 8, f2, d1, attacking the queen. Now, Hans played a very nice counterattack move. He didn't move the queen to safety. Probably most of us will be thinking about ways to saving our queen. Well, he didn't. So this young grandmaster replied with bishop e6. And at the end of the tactics, you will see that black comes up with an extra pawn and a slightly better position, following bishop to e6, which attacks the white queen. What did Magnus play here? He took the black queen. Obviously, bishop takes back the queen. Rook takes on a8. Rook f8 takes back on a8. The bishop takes on f6. Pawn takes, and king plays f1. Why did Magnus play king f1? Simply, he didn't want to lose the pawn on e2, because at this very moment here, you want to preserve your material. So he just chose to play the king to f1, not mentioning that maybe at some point you want to make another move with the king so that you won't allow the king to play on the d file. Right. So king plays on f1. Rook played on d8. King moves now on e1. Knight plays on a5. And if you wonder, I think the prospect is to just simply get the knight on b3, attacking this rook and make them move one more time. Rook opposes the other rook. They refuse to trade. They just simply want to preserve the rook to attacking the c3, which is a weak pawn. So the pawn on c3 is a weak pawn. You will have to look after that pawn all the time. Knight plays on d2. Reason being, you're attacking a very aggressive bishop, and maybe at some point you might be able to just make a couple of more jumps on e4, attacking f6, and also the bishop, the white bishop on g2, attacks on a long diagonal. So this guy might be staying there for a while to look after the pawn. So that was probably the most aggressive move Magnus was seeing at this very moment. The engine says, the machine says, the game should be a drawish. So it's just something like minus 0.2, which from a human perspective, that means almost nothing. The game should be a draw according to the engine at this point in the game. c4 now has been offered, which was a liability anyway. And the thing is, once they might accept it with the knight, the bishop might be free to grab the pawn on b7 as a compensation. So black took with the bishop, knight took, rook takes. So the rook took the knight, because if you take it with this, guys, you might have a couple of problems. First, there might be a pin. There might be a pin here, and it just doesn't look very good. So you don't want to play this kind of things. And rook takes, and at the same time, the b7 pawn is being defended by the knight. Check. Magnus tries to take advantage of the back rank and the 7th rank, and he will try to focus his rook and the bishop on the f7. You will see this, guys. We're getting there. Look at this move. Quite aggressive one. You know, that's a sort of a very active bishop. Look at the bishop, my chess friends. Very strong. And now if you kind of manage to get the rook on the 7th rank, that will be a nice attacking point on f7. Now, Hans Niemann very rightfully defends the weaknesses, because those are the black's weaknesses. I'm talking about the f7 and I'm talking about the b7, which are being reinforced now. And he doesn't allow Magnus to get the rook on the 7th rank. That would have been quite unstoppable. So he plays exactly the right move on time. Magnus tries to just nick some pawns over there on the back rank, on the sideline, but obviously Hans doesn't allow that to happen. Rook to b8, which is sort of like, you're not going to play your knight because then I'm going to get the pawn from you. So Hans Niemann pushed the pawn in the middle. The idea probably being here, he wants to get the king on f6. Maybe he wants to push one more time and just harass this bishop, just trying to move the king a little bit more centralized, to centralize your kings towards the end of the game. So that's one of the principles. You would like to get the king to participate as well, because, guys, the king itself is an attacking piece. Pawn goes down. Okay, g4 has been played. I suspect simply Magnus wanted to dismantle the pawn structure, the black pawn structure. So from a human perspective, pushing g4 to just undermine the f5, and maybe you should be able to just grab the other pawn. So that's what Magnus very likely had in mind here. Now, Hans played a very aggressive move again, of course, and very well played. Rook attacks the bishop on d5. So he didn't take on g4, but instead he attacks a more important piece. So bishop retreats now, and already Magnus he already felt here uncomfortable because of this checks, and it's already something you're not very comfortable with. Now the knight simply wants to grab the pawn on a3. So if the engine is not very convinced in their perfect accuracy, actually from a human perspective, you just want to go for the weak pawns. It's very important, because then those two guys can march down the board and promote. So pawn went up. He didn't want to give the pawn. Now knight very nicely now. Those knights could be a nightmare. So now the knight attacks the rook, which got to move. The rook goes on a desired square. Please notice, guys, how the rook and the bishop still target the f7. And now the white rook also adds a bit of pressure to the b7 square. So he took now, right? Rook attacks the knight with tempo, hoping that they might be able to grab the pawn on f7. And now Magnus plays something very... not Magnus, guys. Hans Niemann plays something very interesting. And if you wonder what is that, well, we're talking about... If this white pawn were to take on e3, just imagine what devastating would be a knight over to e4. right? Knight over to e4, and then something like rook to c1, checking the very, very unpleasant situation here for white to play, right? So it is something here. So pawn took, knight plays down. Look at this. Very, very problematic. King goes away, check, king g2. Rook now attacks both weaknesses, the e2 and the a2 pawn. Now bishop takes, rook takes, check, king goes away, check again. King comes into the play, so they just simply want to get the king to attacking. Bishop plays and attacks the knight. Rook makes sort of a pin, so if you take, then I'm going to take your rook. Check, king goes away. And now Magnus played actually the big blunder that led him to losing the game. The commentators and the engine recommend immediately rook e7, and the position continues. The game continues. Black still has a bit of an advantage, but rook, rook e7 is definitely the move to have played here. But he didn't do this, but instead he played the rook on a wrong square on d7, hoping, he was hoping maybe for a discovered check or something. Black replies with knight to g5, checks, rook's trading, not knight plays very nicely on f3, attacking the king and attacking the rook, taking, okay, knight's being attacked, grabbed another pawn, takes. Now, the bishop, what the bishop wants to do is just to get rid of the black pawns here. Okay, that's what probably Magnus had in mind, and just hoping for some advancement of the white pawn. So that's the plan for Magnus at this very second. We very much assume. So he was hoping for the bishop to being able to stopping and maybe advancing that pawn. But now it's a bit too late. Bishop was being attacked. The pawn is being captured. And as you could see now, guys, we are profiling a situation in which black is having two extra free pawns, and it will be impossible task for white to stopping the advancement of the pawns. They will be coming down, and that's it. So Magnus just simply forfeited the game. All right, there is no way for white here to being able stopping those pawns. So one of them will necessarily become a queen. Okay, so that was very roughly, quickly being put, guys. The round number 3, Nimzo-Indian for black, Magnus Carlsen versus Hans Niemann. Okay, so guys, that was it for today. I shall see you shortly with more videos. Thank you very much for joining me, fellas. Subscribe to my YouTube channel and we'll do more chess material. Thanks very much. Have a wonderful day.